I'm David Glenn Taylor, and this is the Voyagers Podcast. Okay, welcome to the first, metaphysical episode of the Voyagers. I know a few weeks ago we were talking about taking pictures of the surface of the sun, and last week we talked about politics, which might have been difficult for some, but hey, you're still here and listening, so let's talk about something a little more out there. I know you've heard of Burning Man, the annual experimental festival that takes place in the Nevada desert outside of Black Rock City every year. I think I became aware of it like many people did through social media, especially Instagram. Every year during the festival, these crazy, funky images would begin to scatter around the internet with insane costumes framed by what looks like a Mad Max kind of post-apocalyptic aesthetic. But I really had no idea what it was until one day I'm on the beach with some other parents watching our kids surf, and a friend and I were talking about some images we had seen from the virtual Burning Man that had just taken place. And I was like, yeah, man, did you see those pics of Jonathan? And he says, oh man, you didn't know? Jonathan's like Burning Man royalty, and that dude founded one of the oldest camps at Burning Man. He's a legend. And my Voyager's mind was piqued. Before we get into the conversation, one important note about Jonathan Yudis. He is a mystic, in the true sense. He's tuned in and he's hyper aware. He's not the guy to just sit and talk about the game and sip a beer and that's as deep as we're going. He challenges me to think deeper. And if you let him, he will challenge you too. You're talking to a person who knows literally nothing about Burning Man. And I know that's because I got married young, had kids young, and stuff like that. My life was kind of just moving that direction. It just never came into my circle, in terms of an understanding. And, when Instagram kind of blew up, all of a sudden these photos would come out of Burning Man every year where it would be this thing. And I'm like, what is this thing? They get out in the desert and they just burn a thing? And I never really understood, but you were there at the beginning.
Well, yeah. Let me see. First of all, I would preface this with it's one of those things just as a vast opening,
yeah.
It would be like you saying, can you tell me about Christianity? And that's the reaction I want.
Yeah.
And by that,
let's talk about Burning Man. Right.
No. A lot of people would say, wait a second, how is Burning Man Christianity? But all I mean is that everybody that identifies themselves as quote unquote Christian, I think if you had a billion of us in this room at the mic, you'd get a billion different answers.
Yes.
There'd be some commonality.
Yes.
But there would be no one correct thing.
No, there's actually I think I looked it up at one point. There's over 4,000 different kind of Christian denominations in the world. There's over 280 or something in the United States alone.
Yeah.
Versions of Christianity.
And I'm just saying that in fairness to what I perceive as this quote unquote thing called Burning Man.
Okay.
And
I want to hear
to honor it.
Right.
Of course, it hasn't been around nearly as long as Christianity.
Yeah.
It's not a faith and all of that. But I'm just saying, whatever it is, I think you could ask anybody that's experienced it and get a different answer. Right. So I'm saying this is what it is to me. I am a 21-year Burning Man veteran.
Right.
So, this
you founded
this year,
Camp Mystic.
I was one of the original 3 founders of Camp Mystic. Burning Man, though, in a nutshell, started in, I think, 1986 on Baker Beach in San Francisco. And there's a lot of different sort of legend stories, but bottom line, for whatever reason, Larry Harvey and several other, founding people decided that they were going to meet up on this beach, and they built this edifice of a man, of a wooden figure, and burned it. And that was the first Burning Man, and I think it started simple, and it has evolved since then. After 10 years, it grew. The next year, there were a few hundred people because they were like, "Hey, we're going to burn this guy on the beach. You should. It's going to be fun." And they tell other people, and so it went on like that for 10 years, and then it got to the point where they outgrew Baker Beach, and they were like, there are too many regulations in terms of being able to do it on the beach, and it was getting too big, and so they were like, we got to go somewhere we can really just do this, on our own with free, kind of in a free environment. And so they moved to the Black Rock Desert in Nevada.
Yeah.
About 12 years in, I was at my first one in 1998, and it was in the Black Rock Desert in Nevada. Sure. And I think it was either 12 or between 12 and 15,000 at that point. Wow. So it had grown from a few people 12 years later to like, but and which at that time was a large festival.
Yeah, that's huge.
But comparatively now, 98, it's pre-internet really. It's pre a lot of things.
Yeah.
Back when I first started, there was no even like the lighting out there was like glow sticks. But at this point, what I would say, like in terms of what is Burning Man, there's the Burning Man event that happens in the desert every year, and it's sort of organized and operated by the Burning Man organization or the Burning Man Project, which has shifted from a group of individuals that were sort of, overseeing and running this thing for a long time into a nonprofit. What I feel like this year more than anything brought out was that Burning Man, what really unites people under this banner of Burning Man are the 10 principles. And they didn't always exist. Okay. But now there are 10 principles that are, as an example, one of them is leave no trace, which is, and these are important to say that they're not just literal like, do this. These are spiritual principles, at least in my opinion. In a literal sense, leave no trace is like wherever you go, you leave that place cleaner, purer than you found it. Yeah. And that's important because part of the nature of this event has always been you go out to the desert, everybody comes, you bring everything you need, you build whatever you build art, you build your shelters and survival and all of that stuff. Yeah. And then when it's done, everybody leaves. And so there's this principle of like, but the desert itself will be cleaner, not just clean, but cleaner when we leave than when we came. And so it's always celebrated another important theme, which is the sort of ephemeral nature of reality. And that's kind of cool, is like there's this incredible artwork and projects that are made. And yet in the early days, they would mostly be burned. Now if they're not burned, they're not all wood. And, some people are environmentally conscious, so they're not all burned. They're at least taken down. So it's still celebrating this, like no matter how much effort, energy you put into these things, it's temporary, and it's meant to be celebrated in its temporal nature, very much like a Tibetan mandala, a sand mandala. These monks spend their lives studying these spiritual precepts and creating art when they go into this deep meditative state and create this incredible design. It's usually like a map or a design of something of like a spiritual dimension. But then it's sand, and they'll spend 10 days or 20 days or something on these, and then they blow them over and like in the wind, and they disappear. So that's kind of like the spirit of Burning Man itself. And that's just one principle. So I would tell people to study the principles. For me, if somebody was like, what is Burning Man? The edifice, the surface level of like, oh, it's this event in the festival or in the desert is one aspect of it, and you could certainly go there and experience that. But I feel like what brings us together and what it really is moving forward in 2020 is these 10 principles that a common community or tribe or whatever you want to say of people celebrate. And that's a really inspiring thing. How
many people are we talking about now?
Last year in 2019 when we were still in the desert, because of course 2020 has been an interesting year and we were unable to do it in the traditional sense. It was this year was the multiverse, but last year I think was 80,000. So it's grown to 80,000. It's like the third largest city behind Vegas and Reno in Nevada for the week it exists. And it's got radio stations, it's got a post office, you can have a mailbox in front of your camp. It's a full-on city for the week it exists. But on a deeper level for me, it's like the biggest party on the planet, but party in the best possible sense of the word. I don't mean party in terms of just, people going and getting intoxicated. I mean party in terms of people coming together to celebrate life, to really celebrate like who we are and what is possible when we're at our best. To me, that's a party. So it's hard because you have to like pack up, you have to leave your job, your family, whatever you're doing. You have to go out into the desert. It's challenging conditions. There's windstorms and dust outs and whiteouts with the dust. It's hot during the day. It can be really hot, It can be cold at night. Sometimes some years have been, adverse weather. I mean, when it rains out there, it's awful. So you're going through all of this. But when you're out there, I feel like it's a different relationship to life that a lot of us don't get to experience in our ordinary extraordinary realities.
Yeah.
You know, so the way I describe it to people is like, if you've ever gone on vacation with friends, maybe a camping trip or just, you know, traveling, but where all of you are on vacation, that in and of itself is a pretty magical thing.
Yeah,
because
right.
you know, nobody's worried about work. You usually in the Grand Playa, or what they used to call the default world, but I like to call the Grand Playa, because the desert out there is called the Playa.
Right.
So when people refer to like Burning Man, they're like, oh, out on the Playa. But at Camp Mystic, we've tried to promote this idea of like, this is just the Grand Playa.
Right.
You know, we have to get away from this thinking that we need to be out in the desert during that 1 week to make the magic happen. The real, I feel like, vision of Larry Harvey, you know, who is kind of credited as the creative force behind it, you know, has been doing it since the early years. He came up with the themes of Burning Man every year. I'm sure he and the early people were behind a lot of the principles. Although they emerged, which is another really neat thing, is that it's like it's this living thing. Yeah. The principles have emerged, and now there's even a few that they want to add to the 10. But one of, I think, his dreams was he witnessed his dream come true in the desert. Yeah. He saw the creativity and the community and the radical free expression and all these different things blossoming. But I think his real dream, he had a stroke and passed away about 2 years ago. I think his dream was to see this affect the world. Yeah. And it was affecting the world, definitely has. And it's influenced technology and culture in so many ways. And now I think that's the larger thing, is just all of us bringing it into our Grand Playa lives.
Does social media help that or hurt that? In terms of, has it helped Burning Man, or has it hurt Burning Man?
You know, I think it's a both. I think it's a both. I think that, you know, in some ways, of course, it's spread some of the joy and celebration and awareness, and in other ways it's taken away. I think that, you know, the problem is when you see things without experiencing them firsthand, your mind goes to work. You know, like
I see those photos and I think, this is like Mad Max? What are we doing?
It is part Mad Max.
Right.
But I think, you know, there's too many people that are like going for the first time, don't necessarily really even know what it is yet. They've just bought some clothes that they know will fit in, because, you know, like when I first started going to Burning Man, the radical free expression, and it was like, wear whatever you want. The costumes were open. Back then there was no burner look. It was before there was all fuzzy clothes and bling and glitter. I don't know, you know, the Burning Man look now. There's a look. But I saw that culture, that couture, you know, develop and come to the point where that's like the Burning Man look. Like in the early days, it was just as cool to have like a 3-piece suit, because nobody out there in the desert was wearing a suit. I had a guy once, he had a suit and tie, he gave me a business card. It was amazing. It was classic, because out there that was like pretty radical. I always felt like a freak, you know, I mean, inside. And I've had my own family and my wife, they're like, Dad, you're weird, you know, and I accept that, you know, I embrace it now. But one of the things for me was that Burning Man was like the first place I'd ever been where I was not the weirdest person in the room. And I was even like maybe in the middle, or like, you know, conservative, no, maybe not conservative. It was definitely this collection of individuals who were not afraid to be nonconformist, have different ideas, have different thinking. And it was almost like this environment where like anything goes. Like what I like to say is, and I think this is applicable to culture, is as long as you are not doing harm to others, there is still a line in the sand. And I say that because in the early days of Burning Man, there were like these like Mad Max kind of like anarchistic, you used to be able to shoot guns out there.
Oh, really?
You know, I remember my first year, like I would be in the porta potties just going to the bathroom, and there were these like dune buggy gangs that would come by, and they'd drive by with baseball bats and they'd smash the porta potty. Hey, you know, cursing, and you'd be in there going to the bathroom like, you know, like basically it was horrible. It was really frightening. But looking back, it was kind of, you know, beautiful and genius just because I experienced it. But I'm saying, so like even back then it was like anything goes. And then I think that, you know, as culture evolves, or as anything, you know, goes, that's how Burning Man has changed, in my opinion. It has definitely year by year become more regulated. So it is more like, you know, there are rules and there's regulations, and you can do this, but you can't do that. And it kind of has to have that happen that way, or else it wouldn't exist. You know, they have to get permits from the Bureau of Land Management, and the more more people there are. And, you know, I remember thinking in the early days, like, oh, this is so incredible. But once somebody dies, I wonder if they're going to stop this. Right. You know, when you buy your ticket, it basically says you could die here, and you're taking that responsibility. And that's kind of an outgrowth of the early days when there was, you know, art was like, you know, there's a totem pole of cars that somebody's like welding together on their own. If that thing falls down when you're climbing it, like, sorry. Right. And that happens, you know, stuff like that. And there were art cars, and I used to love to go out into the desert. It's the 25 square miles, so you can go deep into the desert, and I would just lie on the ground at night and stare up at the stars and just journey, and it was incredible. But I remember I would always try and create this like energetic bubble around me because there were these art cars, like buses, like Mad Max buses, and sometimes being driven by highly intoxicated people in the middle of the night. And I'd be like, wow, that'd be a really kind of sad way to go out. Like, you know, what happened to Jonathan? Like, oh, it was, you know, run over in the middle of the desert, you know, like, so it took a lot of trust. But yeah. So if I had to sum up Burning Man to you, I mean, I'm a huge Burning Man advocate. It's been a really transformational thing in my life. I've you know, have this camp and tribe and community now that for me is a very spiritual community. It's called Mystic, and I feel like that's what ties us all together, is that we all appreciate this aspect of mysticism, which is embracing the mystery of life and, you know, interconnectedness. And it's definitely a heart-centered community, like people, but very non-denominational. It's not about this faith or that faith. It's healers, and it's yoga teachers, and it's thought leaders and entrepreneurs and scientists and technicians, and I mean, our technologists and artists, a lot of artists, and just cool people. For me, it's been this place where I can just live the way I want to live. And my camp in particular, we put a high value in encouraging people to be their own superhero. Like, who do you want to be? We have playa names, and your playa name, you know, my name is Jonathan, but my playa name is Cosmic Cowboy. So if you talk to anybody at Burning Man, they probably don't even know Jonathan. They're like, oh, Cosmic Cowboy, because that's how I introduced myself. And, you know, it's also a commodity-free environment where there's no money. Going way back to what I said about the vacation, where like when you go on vacation, usually you have enough money. You're like, oh, I'm just going to bring $2,000, and I'm going to take the kids out to dinner, and we're going to go to the park, and there's no stress because you're like, I know I'm spending this. Burning Man is that times 1,000, because once you're in the city, there is no money. So it's a gifting culture. So like, you know, you bring your water, you bring food, everybody is coexisting. If, you know, like, I can't tell you how many times I'm like riding my bike or walking the desert, I'm thirsty, and somebody's like, here's a coconut water, here's water. People just give everything away, and they give it away not just physically but energetically. Like, oh, are you having a hard time? Let me you know, give you a little back rub, and you're like, I don't even know you. And you know, you're gonna literally and it's like somebody who's good at it. They're like, oh, you get a little massage standing up in the desert, and then you walk 15 more feet and somebody's like cracking open a coconut, and you're like, wait, this is not really happening. And they're like, you know, I've been riding my bike all day waiting for the perfect person to give this coconut to, and you were just 5 minutes ago thinking, what am I going to do, because I'm like an hour away from my camp and I ran out of water and I'm really thirsty. That's Burning Man. That aspect of like your thoughts manifesting really magically. There's a lot of magic happening there. And I always encourage people to go, like, somebody like you would love it. I know you'd love it, because it's like that manifestation and that witnessing of what's possible. Like, if you're like, what happens if we put 100 really cool people, like nice, kind, loving, generous, you know, people in a room, and we allow them, and we sort of free them to just express themselves, and it's pretty incredible. Now, I'm not saying it's utopian. I mean, like I told you that early story, you know, there's also it's a lot like Maui. I feel like this island is an island of manifestation. So if you're in the right plug set, you know, wow, you're going to manifest some amazing things. If you're in a negative mindset, or you're kind of dealing with stuff, well, then that could manifest. But it's ripe for manifestation.
So as someone who's never been, like, if I wanted to go, would I just show up?
You could, yeah. I mean,
because how do you get into Camp Mystic? I would come knock. Hey, can I join Camp Mystic?
Well, there's all you would need to do is get a ticket. Which again, in this day and age, because it's grown and it's the internet, and now it's global. You know, it's not as easy as it. I remember the first year, like, tickets sold out, and we were like, "What?" It's no different than a concert. Like, oh, you know, when you really want to go to the U2 concert, you just have to visualize, I'm gonna get it. Or the best is, I Need a Miracle, if you're a Dead fan. You know, that was my first first Dead show ever. I didn't even really, I literally was getting into them in a van. I was just trying to get away from a relationship that was breaking my heart.
Right.
And ended up in a van with people like, yeah, we're going to a Dead show. And I was like, oh, okay, as long as you'll take me away from this, Right. And so I get there and they're like, you need a miracle. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, just hold up your finger, say you need a miracle and see what happens. And sure enough, like it happened. Like I'm in Shakedown, the environment where everybody's making grilled cheeses. And that was an early Burning Man for me because cool people, great music, good times. And sure enough, somebody's like, it was a gift. It was like, here, I've got a ticket and I was looking for somebody who's never been to a Dead show. You're that guy. Right. Here you go. And I go in and it's like this epic concert and it's just awesome. And from that moment on, I was a huge Dead fan. So how you would do it is you get a ticket and you go. Like if you want to go as an individual, there's all this, like in the back streets, there's all this open camping in the city. And you could, you need a tent, you need some food and some water and whatever you need to survive for the week and you're good. Now, camps have developed over the years just because once you do that, like we did in the early days, and you're like, wow, this is not as easy as I thought. Like, I'm parched. I forgot chapstick. I don't have the right boots. I didn't bring goggles, whatever. Yeah. When you're with a collective of 50, 100, 200 people, and then, like we build a shade structure, we build a dining room where we can all eat. My camp, we've got an amazing, chef that she's a burner. And so, so instead of having to make all the meals and everything, I try and maximize my time to see art, to experience people, to contribute, and all that. And so for me, I've gotten away from like all the energy it takes to cook. Sure. It's a lot. Cook, clean, those are kind of what camps are, in my opinion. Sure. Like every camp has its own thing. Right. We're the 80s rock music roller disco camp. And, if you're in that camp, you build a literal, like out of plywood, you build a roller rink, and every day from 12 to 3, they play 80s rock music and roller skate, and they've got 300 pairs that are open for anybody that wants to come up and do it with them. Just one out of thousands of examples. Like every camp has their own thing. Right. But in general, camps are just people that want to go together, spend the time together, and make it a little easier. For Camp Mystic, we have a sponsorship program, just because we've got really specific sort of values and ethos. And we realized that while we were growing, once we got like over 250 people, we felt like we lost intimacy. Yeah. And we wanted it to be so that if you're in our camp, you have the opportunity to connect with everybody.
So sponsors, as in like you can't get in unless somebody sponsors you.
Yeah. So I would sponsor you. I would say, hey, I know this wonderful person that I think would really gravitate and enjoy Mystic. And then we have a series of questions that are, sort of like, what does radical compassion mean to you? Right. How has it affected you in your life? Right. Or radical collaboration is another one. We've got like kind of 5 values, and you write your answers, and it's just a process. But then
is there like a board of elders that
we do. We've got like a elders council, and it's kind of like a Native American council. So it's like everybody's wisdom is honored. Right. But that's the sort of governing body for camp. Tries to steer it in the right direction. Yeah. When it comes up, deals with conflict resolution, and also deals with the technical, like how much are we going to charge for dues this year? And somebody's like, oh, well, if we charge an extra $20 a person, we can get a new dome and, make it the healing dome, or, if whatever, just, if we need to build a new, get a better generator this year. So our power isn't going out every few hours. Right. So, those are the kind of technical.
So as someone, like I said, that didn't know anything about, now I seem to know a lot about Burning Man, which is awesome. But as someone who didn't know anything about it and has learned through social media, it's harder than it looks, right?
Oh yeah.
I've been in lots of wilderness situations and in survival situations, and there's no joke about being in the desert, man. And so it sounds to me, it's awesome that there's 80,000 people out there to help you survive. So I'm assuming that every year a group of naive people show up, and there are those horror stories where they just weren't prepared for what the desert was going to offer them. So you have like a medical tent and things like that.
Yeah,
and
there's a lot of medicals. All throughout the city, they've got the medical areas. I feel like it is a psychedelic culture, like now a lot of people are like, oh, that's just where people go to the desert and do drugs. And I think that's like sort of denigrating the nature of what it really is. Yeah. Like, I feel like the environment itself is like a drug. Right. Like just being at Burning Man for real, like one of these environments where you could get really high because of, like I said, the human interconnectedness and the connection and the loving nature that I experienced there and the creativity. Yeah. And because it is this kind of open environment, there's definitely, I'd say, a deeper openness and exploration of like consciousness. And so, you know, like these days, like when it comes to like microdosing or, I mean, I don't know if I've actually seen like ayahuasca circles at Burning Man, but I feel like people that are maybe have experienced ayahuasca, things like that when I, you know, that's to me like psychedelic consciousness expanding things. That's definitely open there.
Is there a police force there?
Yeah. It's heavily regulated now. I mean, unlike it was many years ago. Like now there's, I mean, I don't know, there's undercover law enforcement, there's state, there's federal. It's not the kind of thing like if you were just walking down one of the streets or even in the desert smoking a joint, like you could get arrested. So it's like a regular city in that sense. However, I would say if that's your prerogative, like if you were like, wow, I would really love to, you know, find somebody that had a joint, like anything else there, like it would be no different than if you said I would want to find a, you know, randomly like a diet Coke. You know, like either way, you could probably wander in several hundred feet in any direction and find what you
find the soda tent.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like these people are like, come on in, man. We're just like having all kinds of bubbly.
You know, we were talking about concerts before, and I think that that's a good analogy. So I don't know about you, but I've been to a lot of concerts, and maybe it's shifted a little bit more recently, but certainly when I was younger, you know.
But you had kids. I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah. You know, you'd go to a concert, and for me, it would be like, oh, now I smell the reefer. And there'd be beer drinking. Oh, yeah. You know, like that goes kind of hand in hand with like a good music show. Now, if somebody was going to, you know, the Rolling Stones, U2, you know, any great concert, and then they were saying like, oh, isn't that a drug fest? You know, I'd be like, well, yeah, you know, like that definitely exists there, but you're missing out on like this incredible music by this band. And everybody, like, have you been somewhere where there's 30,000 people together in a small space just enjoying this music and we all love it or having a great time? And it's the same thing where like, yeah, well, I heard there was a fight in the parking lot, you know, and you'd be like, yeah, you know, yeah, that's true. That did happen. But out of 30,000 people, the fact that there were only 3 arrests is actually pretty good. So it's just the exact same with Burning Man. Like I would be lying if I was like, oh, there are no drugs there. And, you know, like it exists, but it's not what it's about. In the same way that you go to a concert for the music and people choose what they do there. And it's an environment where people feel free and open. And so they choose to kind of play the way they want to play. But it's not about that. It's about the music. And Burning Man, the music is everything. The music is riding your bike. It's, you know, meeting people. I mean, it's the levels of the expressions of creativity are just almost beyond imagination. I mean, I was out in the middle of the desert and there was a huge 3-story high Victrola, like like a sculpture, but I'm talking about like, you know, 50 feet by 50 feet, 3 stories high of this ancient record player. And on the flat area of it was a 75-person orchestra. And I'm talking way out, like not, there's no advertising, there's no paper where you're like, yeah, 2:00, you know, like you're just like, what is that? And it just looks like a thing. And then you ride further and you ride and you're like, oh my gosh, is that a Victrola? And then you get up and you're like, wow, this thing is massive. And then somebody's like, shh. And I'm like, what? And they start playing Beethoven's Ninth.
Oh my goodness.
And you're sitting there, and because of the environment, because you're in the middle of the desert and you've been riding your bike, and it's just everything's elevated. I mean, if you go to the local opera house and you see that, it's still amazing, but you're kind of expecting it. Like at Burning Man, everything's unexpected. And like from that Victrola, you can ride, and driving past you is literally a pirate ship where somebody's taken a tractor trailer and somehow built a pirate ship on it, and they're pirates like swashbuckling and, you know, and they're swinging on ropes, and you're like, okay, there's a pirate ship. And then, you know, you go somewhere, and then you go and there's like an electronica show, and it's like, oh, you know, there's Paul Oakenfold is playing a set, and then you go somewhere. It's just it's a lot of craziness and a lot of fun.
Paul Oakenfold is out there?
Oh yeah, I mean the electronica scene. If you're into DJs and everything, is it's the best electronica on the planet. I mean, and a lot of other music, but it's not like concert music. It's not like, you know, like it's not organized like that.
I almost don't want to bring up the pandemic in Burning Man because of course you hear that now and everybody has that knee-jerk reaction now of like, well, it sounds like a super spreader event to me, and we all have that feeling of, are we ever going to get to do that again? Because I know you guys did a virtual Burning Man this year. I know it was not the same. You just can't replicate what you're describing, right? Over a computer. It just can't. And you can do what you can do, and you can have that experience, but what's going on in your mind in terms of like, are you grieving or are you actually hopeful?
Yeah, all of the above. Like I went through a definite mourning process because, like I said, 20 years running, like that this is, for me, my daily Burning Man is meditation, is connecting to source. And for me, like what I liken it to that I think most people could understand is like you are your iPhone or your smartphone. You got a lot of applications running. You got a lot. It's this tool, and it's got so much potential. Yeah, we all get to choose which apps we have and how we use it. But the nature of the way it's structured is there's a battery, and the battery runs low. And if you just completely go without recharging, it runs out. Right. Your battery will run out. And so for me, plugging in is like that's what I do every day. That's how I recharge my battery. But once a year, I get these magical 2 weeks. Sometimes 3. Because I go to build camp, and now I'm kind of involved with the helping Burning Man itself. And but that's the real, that's the big charge. That's the like where I come back and I just feel like so in love with life and everyone and everything. And I'm just and people actually go through these really weird. You have to warn your spouses and everything for like when you get back from Burning Man, because going from the playa to the Grand Playa can be a pretty rocky road. You've just been like hey, how you doing, George? My new name is glass plate, what? Yes, that's what I want to be referred to, and the husband or wife is like, okay, so there's always that like coming back. And, there was a morning when I realized I couldn't go out to the desert and do what we do. But for me, I was part of, I guess, a smaller crowd that was like, I feel like 2020 has been a year for us all to reevaluate. Yeah, absolutely. And like any other challenge, like any other, obstacle that we face, which is part of life, there's no two ways about it. It's no fun. Yeah. Like there's a part where you're like, wow, this sucks. It sucks not being able to hang out with all these people. And, like for the kids, like they thought they didn't like school. Well, until they couldn't go to school and see their friends and do it, and then now they're like, wow, I wish I could. And so that definitely exists. But I feel like the invitation that we all have is, now what? Like, how do you take this and what do you do with it? Right. And the ultimate, like whatever we're looking for, whatever we're dreaming of, it exists right now. Yeah. It is live. It is real. If you're Buddha, if you're Jesus, if you're Muhammad, if you're whoever your teacher, your great master being is, they're available. They're alive. They're literally as alive now as they ever were. Yeah. You have to go and do the work and cultivate that experience and reach that sort of frequency or dimension so that it's real and it's live and it's not your imagination. It's not, and so it's the same kind of, I feel like that's what we did this year with the multiverse or the online burn, was we were like, okay, we can't go out to the desert, but we can still create art. Yeah. We can still try and create hubs or communities where people can, from all over the world, be like, plugging in and putting goggles on or doing what and connecting and making the best of it. For me, it's a both and. Like, am I excited in 2021 to try and get back out to the desert? Absolutely, 1,000%. I think everybody's going to be so much more grateful and thankful and excited and celebrating being there. But for me, it's kind of like there's a theme that I always say that's a kind of catchphrase at Burning Man that I love, which is let's have the best burn ever. And I'm kind of even like, I'm working on a book and a movie and it all based on this idea. And it's based on, for me, the principle of immediacy. And immediacy is basically about like living in the present moment. To me, it's perhaps the biggest spiritual principle of all. Because whatever you want, whatever your dream is, it actually has to occur in the present moment. It's never going to happen in the future. The future is, by definition, something away from you, something that's in the future.
Yeah, it's not real yet.
And the past is, again, like, is the past. So, like, the only place where it's all going down is the present. And so creating the best burn ever is, in my opinion, is like living in the moment completely fully. I feel like that's the key, is like, that's for me, my meditations, you said, my personal practice, that's what it's really about. Right. It's about recognizing this breath, this actual breath that I'm taking right now is as good as it's ever going to get. And can I be there? Can I experience it? Can I celebrate it? Can I, and if you can, you're done. That's it. That's where it's all happened.
For years, I had a design business with a friend of mine in New Mexico. When we lived in Gallup, New Mexico, him and I ran a little design business. And he was a U2 fan, had seen U2 many times, and was always telling me, you got to go to U2 concert, got to go to U2. It's amazing. You just incredible experience. And then a few years back, he lives in Michigan now. I live in Hawaii. He was like, hey, I got 2 tickets to U2 in Detroit. They were doing the Joshua Tree tour again, and I was like, of course I'm going, right? And we go and have that experience of this watching and being in that space and looking around, and I'm going, I don't know any of these people besides my buddy. I don't know any of these people, but they all feel like family. You're walking out of there with this unifying experience, and the little thing that's whispering in my head is like, we've got to get that back. Got to get that back. Like, that is such an important part of almost like the mental and spiritual and emotional health of the human race, is having those moments and having those things that bring us together. I think about like soccer, in the English Premier League, and these fans coming together and they sing, in the EPL, like they'll sit, you go to a Liverpool game or whatever, and they're standing and singing together. You go to watch the Sounders in Major League Soccer, and there's 6,000 in the ECS, the Emerald City supporters. There's 6,000 of them standing the entire game with their arms over each other, singing and dancing and chanting every single match, and it's what brings them all together. It reunifies them, and kind of like what you're describing with Burning Man, how you have these 10 principles that have emerged out of years and years of this thing. You see the same thing with with them. You see these supporters groups and these fan groups and stuff that create these principles to kind of live through. And it is well, we wouldn't say it's a religious experience. It kind of almost is a little bit, right? But without all the judgment and the hate, hopefully, in the best of cases.
Yeah.
Right?
I was just doing one of these random online quizzes, and one of the questions was, man is in its nature, A, good, B, evil, C, I don't care. I checked good, that's my experience. Is I think of it like a baby.
Yeah.
I think that a baby is a really good example. Like if you're in a hospital or wherever, but if you see a baby that's just been born and it's new and it's big-eyed and looking into the world, and I think most people would say, yeah, that child is good. Right. It hasn't been affected, it hasn't been shaped, it hasn't been molded yet. But if somebody said, is it in its nature good, or is it gonna look around even as a baby and start stomping ants? I think the answer is no. I think that even at the very core level, if nothing else, what I found is all sentient beings celebrate life. Yeah. So one of the only commonalities we have is that we're so different. Right. We really can't even understand each other very well because of how different we are, especially species. But we all appreciate life, and that's actually enough. That's enough to work off of, and just
Yeah, we celebrate. That's true, huh? We celebrate life and we grieve death.
Yeah,
all of us. There's a thing we do here in this on this podcast. Each of my guests at the end, they leave a blessing for the audience. Do you have anything you want to just leave with them?
Yeah,
just
sure.
as a blessing.
This is one of my favorites. It's a chant, and I'll say it and then I'll translate it.
Okay.
Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Peace Peace Peace. And the translation is, may all beings everywhere be happy and free.
Thanks for doing this, man.
It's so much fun.
I know, it's killer, right?
I hope you'll have me again.
We obviously have a lot more to talk about. I think you're going to have to be our seasonal guest, in season 2. We're bringing back Jonathan Yudis. Today we're going to talk about some other awesome things.
My pleasure.
I love it. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. before I leave you this week, I just wanted to say one more thing, based on the conversation that Jonathan and I had and continue to have just about any time I see him. What ceremonies do you have in your life? You know, ceremonies that mark the times and spaces you live in as worthy of remembrance. Maybe a better way to ask the question is this: how do you celebrate life? Because we need a dedicated space to do that well. As Jonathan would say it, we need a playa, a place where we bring our edifice, the constructs we create and cling to, the artificial parts of this material existence. We set them down, we observe them, spend a moment admiring them or grieving them, and then we light them on fire. We walk away knowing that the true thing, the permanent thing, it won't leave us. It's lit with an eternal flame. And that is what, in the end, unifies all of us. We all have it. We are all at Camp Mystic all the time. The only question is, can we see it? The Voyagers podcast is produced by Sugar Sled Productions and recorded in Kula on the island of Maui. It's hosted by me, David Glenn Taylor. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. It helps me grow the audience and keeps the conversation going. And if you're interested in becoming a sponsor or in supporting this podcast, go to our website, voyagerspodcast.com, and click the link to become a Patreon supporter. And if you're interested in becoming a sponsor, let's start a conversation. Just email me, david@voyagerspodcast.com. Next week, I get together with a couple of friends who are changing the world of youth sports by walking parents through their child's experience and fostering self-awareness in the holy trinity of youth sports: the players, the parents, and the coaches. Former pro soccer player and Olympian Patrick Ianni and his business partner, my twin brother Seth Taylor. That's next week on the Voyagers podcast. Mahalo for listening, friends.